to 13, he talks about loving faith. He talks about how it's not just enough that you have faith, but you should be able to love people with that faith. In the second half, starting from verse 14, he talks about a living faith, where he says, it's not enough that you just say, I have faith. Faith without works is dead. Right? Later, in Old Testament, he gives some examples of Old Testament people. We just saw Nathaniel read about Abraham. If you read a few verses from that, we also see that he gives examples of Rahab on how they not just talked about their faith, not just say that they have faith, but they lived in their faith. They demonstrated that faith. And as you all know, faith is very critical, very integral part of every Christian living. We see that in so many verses in the Bible. Ephesians 2:8 says that we are all saved by grace through faith. And there's a Bible verse in Habakkuk 2:4. It says that the just shall live by faith. In the New Testament, the same verse is mentioned 3 times. One in Romans 1:17, another one in Galatians 3:11, another one in Hebrews 10:38. The just shall live by faith. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 gives a definition of faith. Faith is the substance of things that we hope for, and the evidence of things that we have not seen. In that same chapter, we also see that it is impossible to please God without faith. So, as we are here today, I want you all to think about faith. What does the Bible talk about faith? What are the different levels of faith, if there is any? The Bible categorizes faith in 3 broad categories. One is dead faith. Second is double-minded or doubtful faith. And the third one is dynamic or determined faith. So what is this dead faith? We just saw that you read that faith without works is dead. Right? Somebody might say that, oh, I believe in God. I believe that He's there. But if you're not able to demonstrate that, if you're not able to live that faith, it is what faith? Dead faith. So, to illustrate this, let's turn to what we read in the first Bible reading, which is 2 Kings chapter 5. And I know the kids have the English Bible, so let us ask somebody to read verse 6 and 7 in 2 Kings chapter 5.
And he brought a letter to the king of Israel, saying, Now when this letter is come unto thee, behold, I have therewith sent Naaman my servant to thee, and thou mayest recover him of his leprosy. And it came to pass, when the king of Israel had read the letter, that he rent his clothes and said, Am I God to kill and to make alive? That this man doth send unto me a recover of man of his leprosy? Wherefore consider, I pray you, and see how he seeketh a quarrel against me.
In verse 6 and 7, we see the king of Israel. By the way, his name is King Joram. And what does King Joram gets one fine day? One fine day he gets a letter from the king of Syria. In our days, now we get email and text. In those days, you only get letters. Okay? So he gets a letter, and he reads the letter and says, it goes like this: Greetings. Along, the guy who brings this letter, he's my servant, Naaman. And guess what? He's got leprosy. I want you to heal him. And this guy, this King Joram goes, well, I'm not a doctor, but even doctors cannot heal leprosy. Only God can heal leprosy. So he goes, I'm not God. How am I supposed to heal this guy? This king is trying to just make a fight with me. But wait a second. King Joram, you are the king of Israel, right? God led Israelites in the desert for many, many years. God split the Red Sea into half. God gave them manna. And here he encounters with a person who doesn't know God, and he comes to him for help. And this guy believes in God, but what does he say? I'm not God. I can help this guy. Now, look at our lives. Let's say we are believers, and kids in your school, when somebody comes to you and say, hey, can you please help me with math? And if you say, oh, I'm no teacher, I can't help you, what belief do you have? What faith do you have? Dead faith. And parents at work, when somebody comes to you and says, hey, I need some help with this, could you help me? And if you say, I'm no expert, I can help you, what faith do you have? A dead faith. Now, that's who we see in verses 6 and 7. Now I want you to start reading same chapter, verse 1. Here we see another person. We get introduced to a person by name Naaman. Can someone read verse 1? 2 Kings chapter 5.
Now Naaman, captain of the host of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and honorable, because by him the Lord hath given deliverance unto Syria. He was also a mighty man in valor, but he was a leper.
Alright. He's a commander-in-chief, commander of the army of this great kingdom, Syria. God has given him victories in battle. And he's very powerful. And guess what? The king obviously likes him. The king is actually his boss, right? Now, having your boss likes you, it's hard these days. Ask your parents, they will tell you. Right? Now, this person, even though everything was appearing to go great for him, he had a problem. What is that problem? He had leprosy. And that is something that he cannot cure himself of. He needs somebody that he did not know, that somebody is the Jehovah God who can actually cure him. And he comes to know from his servant girl that there is a person that can cure leprosy. And so what he does, he takes his chariots, he takes his horses, he goes to this king and says, hey, I need help. And between Syria and Israel at that time, it's about 100 miles or more than 100 miles. So a guy who doesn't believe in the Jehovah God, he takes his chariot, he takes his horses and drives for 100 miles. Does it say he has got some faith? Would we agree? Yes. Now, is that faith complete or is it partial? Is it doubtful? Let's read verse 9 and 10 to see what the solution was. Can somebody read verse 9 and 10?
Then Naaman went with his horses and chariot, and he stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored to you, and you shall be clean.
Did he like the solution? No. Why? Multiple reasons. Number one was his pride. Here he was, a commander-in-chief, going to this prophet with his horses and chariots, standing outside and saying, hey, I am here. Come and heal me. And what happens? Elisha just stays inside the house. He's just sending his servant out there and saying, hey, just go and dip yourself in that Jordan and you'll be fine. What? Do you know who I am? I am the commander-in-chief. You know what? When we come to God, sometimes we think that we are somebody. We think that we are someone great. But you know what? God looks at us as sinners. God sees us as the person that who we are. And just how Elisha saw this guy, Naaman. And he said that you have leprosy, you just go and dip yourself in Jordan, you will be healed. So let's see in verses 11 and 12 what happens. He gets furious. And can someone read verse 11 and 12?
But Naaman went away angry and said, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot, and cure me of my leprosy.
Oh, wow. So his second problem, his first problem was pride. And his second problem was that he thought the solution is going to be a certain way. He tries to put God in a box and says that if I'm going to get healed, this is how I thought it's going to be healed. And this guy is going to come, he's going to touch me, he's going to pray, and that's how I'm going to get healed. But guess what? That's not what God's plans are. God says in the book of Isaiah, my thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways are not your ways. And look at Prophet Elisha. He goes and tells him something boldly, even though it makes this commander-in-chief mad. And sometimes, when we tell the truth to others, like how Elisha told here, you have to go to River Jordan. And he asked a question, aren't there other rivers out there? They're all the same. They are more beautiful. Likewise, sometimes when we tell people that there's only one way, there's only one way to go to heaven. Jesus is the way, the truth, and life. Guess what? Sometimes it's going to make people mad. But Elisha was not upset to tell the truth. And that's how we got to be. And let's look at Naaman. In this case, thankfully, he had some good servants to tell him, okay, if he had asked you to do something really hard, would you have done it? Yes. So why can't you just go and do what he says? Thankfully, he goes and does, and we know that he got healed by believing at the later part. But his faith, as we can see, he started off right. He drove 100 miles, but it was doubtful. It was double-minded. Now, let's look at another person in the same passage for dynamic faith. Do you guys know who I'm talking about? Somebody in this passage that we read of having dynamic faith. Faith that really where the person believed in. Let's read verses 2 and 3.
And the Syrians had gone out on raids and had brought back captive a young girl from the land of Israel. She waited on Naaman's wife. Then she said to her mistress, if only my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, for he would heal him of his leprosy.
In this chapter of the verses that we read, there's this one person's faith that really amazes me. It is the faith of this little girl who was taken captive by the Syrians. And she wasn't there sitting in this Naaman's house waiting on Mrs. Naaman and saying, you Naamans and Syrians, you better rot. You just kidnapped me. I hope you suffer. That's not what she said. She looks at Naaman's condition and goes, you know what? There's a prophet in my place. I know him. I believe he can cure his leprosy. She is talking of a God and his power in a strange land to people who don't know this God. Now, look at that faith. And God honored that faith. You know why? Jesus says that at the time of Elisha the prophet, there were so many lepers in Israel. But nobody else was cured but this Naaman. And that was because of the faith of this little girl. God honored her faith. Now, I guess this is how the conversation must have happened between Mrs. Naaman and this little girl. She would have said, well, I believe that this prophet would be able to cure the leprosy. Mrs. Naaman would go, really? Have you seen him cure anybody? No. Then why would you say that he'll be able to cure? Well, maybe because in the previous chapter we would see Elisha able to raise up a little child. So, I've seen him raise up a little child. If he can do that, I'm sure God is powerful enough to cure the leprosy. Look at the faith that she has. If I were in her shoes, I probably would have overanalyzed. I would have said, nah, I don't think Elisha will be able to do that. But this little girl was not thinking about all that. She only knew that God can heal leprosy, even though there is no evidence. She had not seen it. That is faith, my dear friends. And as you saw here, let's analyze our life. What kind of faith do we have? Do we have dead faith? Where we say that, I believe in God, but we're not really bold enough to declare, we're not able to demonstrate that faith to people that we know. People who don't know Christ, don't know God. Are we able to say that boldly? Do we have dead belief? Or do we have a doubtful, a double-minded faith where, like Peter, he walked on water. He had a good start, but then after that, he was like, oh, I think I'm falling, right? Are we something like that? Or like this little girl, do we have that dynamic faith where we believe our God is stronger